Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about one of the most important parts of UPSC English Literature Optional. That is how to answer the 150 word critically comment question in section A of paper 2. If you have ever felt stuck in these questions, not knowing how to balance the context, analysis and critique, stay tuned. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to approach them. So first, let's understand the task. In this five sets of questions that they ask, we usually find around 4 to 5 lines of poem that is in our syllabus, be it Eliot, Yeats, Ramanujan, Larkin. So a, a line from a few lines from their poem feature in the exam, and the directive of the exam is that we have to critically comment on it, right? Now, we have to understand the task. Now, critically comment does not mean to paraphrase. No. If you just verbatim paraphrase what is written in those lines, you will not get marks. So, critically comment would mean that we have to first analyze it and then evaluate. Evaluation is also an important aspect of critically comment. Okay. Now, along with that, when these lines are mentioned, the name of the poet are mentioned. And we'll see from examples, the name of the poet is given, be it Yeats, Eliot, Larkin, Ramanujan, Auden, the name is given. But the poetry is not given. The poem is not mentioned, right? Neither is the context mentioned. So we have to identify the source as well as the context. Source here would mean we have to identify from which poem that they have taken those lines. Obviously, it goes unsaid. And of course the context of it, like what is the background of it, the historical background, yeah, socio-political background that has made the poet write those few lines, right? And once that job is done, we have to interpret meaning of those lines which the poet want to convey. Now that meaning can be anything. It might be some very historically rooted meaning. It might be some interpretation that you have driven. So you have the liberty in this section to be the architect of the content. But it obviously has to be value added, it has to be backed by reason, right? You can also take up a particular word or phrase and talk about from an historical perspective or from linguistic perspective, from psychoanalytical perspective, right? But here, the major weightage of your answer would be, and once done, once you have explained those lines, interpreted the meaning, and talked about the imagery of those lines, we will try to offer a concise critique. Like can drop a name of one or two critique. For example, if it's in case of Yeats, Richard Ellman is a very famous critique, right? So we can quote some critique, but it should be contextual. We will not try to force ourselves to incorporate a critic just to make a point that I know a critic. We won't do that, right? And this all these things has to be done within approximately 150 words, right? Approximately 150 words. So here, more than knowledge, more than content, what matters is precision. You have to be very precise. Okay? Chalo, we'll move on to the next. So, what is the ideal structure of the to approach these kind of answers? Now, it will be foolish for us to assume that uh, there is only one structure. No, if it's lacking, we have to approach it in a different way. If it is ordinary, we have to approach in a different way, right? But if there is a mother structure, just for our preparation, just to think in those lines, right? Think in a manner that will help us to write an answer within those 6.5 to 7 minutes, those 150 words. If there is if is a structure, so this is that particular structure. Again, I'm saying this is not something that we will be using it across the poem. No, even within poetry, even within a particular poet, there are many poems. Like for example, in Eliot, we have three poems, right? We have Burnt Norton, we have Journey of the Magi, and we have uh, Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, right? So here again, you have to understand this is a mother structure. It is not something which is cast in stone. Obviously, you can use your rationally, you can use your creativity to give a different. But if let's say that you don't have a structure, this is the structure that you can follow, and it helps you to recollect content and generate a fluid and essay type um, approach for the answer, right? So, what is the idea? So, first is that we have to establish and identify from where those lines have been taken, be it a two-liner or a three-liner or a four-liner. We'll take an example of a four-liner. Wherever, from wherever, whichever poetry it has been taken, you have to first identify the poetry, right? Once you have identified the poetry, now that is the tricky part. Like that, here you cannot go wrong, right? Once you have identified the poetry, then you come to the, as I've said, the major chunk of it, right? Pick up a imagery or keywords, right? And explain it. Do not paraphrase it and explain it. We'll take an example and we'll understand in a better manner. And once that is done, the third step would be to critically analyze that particular line by quoting a critic. Self-evaluation is also possible, right? You have to give some, if possible, if you have to give some counter view, can give some counter view, right? And finally, you like give a concise conclusion and wrap it up. Now, you have to understand something. Conclusion does not mean summarization of what you have written. No, conclusion would mean that you're value adding based on where your answer has flown, right? So, for example, in Eliot, if you're talking about temporality with respect to a human being, a temporality with respect to a being, right? If you're talking about how Burnt Norton focuses on being a religious, focuses on temporality, soul, journey or evolution of a being from being a situated self to an evolved self, then your conclusion would be in that particular area, right? It cannot be a generic or cannot be a summarization of what you have written, right? So you have to be careful over here. Okay? Okay. So we'll take an example and we'll try to understand. So this year in 2025, UPSC had asked a question or given these four lines, right? And these four lines have been taken from A Prayer for My Daughter, and which Yeats wrote in 1919, right? Just after the World War One. I'll read the lines. The line goes hereby in this manner. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all is accustomed ceremonious for arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled into the thoroughfares. Right? I'll read it again. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all's accustomed ceremonious for arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled in the thoroughfares. Okay. Now, obviously, the author is the poet is here Yeats, and he has written it in 1991 after World War One, and it is inspired by birth of Yeats's daughter Anne at Thur Belaili or Belaili, the pronunciation would be right. So, just after the birth of Yeats's daughter Anne, this particular poem has been written, A Prayer for My Daughter. Now, what does the poem do? If just in a few lines, if I'm about to give the essence of the poem, it is that it blends Ireland's political unrest with personal parental hopes. Now, you have to understand here that Yeats was a tormented soul of the 1920s and the 30s. Even though he knew the condition which Ireland uh, was concerning, but he was not particularly agreeable with the politics which was in Ireland, the revolutionary politics, you might say. And there are many reasons, we'll not go into that. So this is one of the background of the poem. You cannot deny that when you're reading an Yeats's poem, you cannot deny that this particular background would be missing. So Ireland's political unrest is in the background, but this is not the poem. The poem is different. The poem is about, it's a prayer for my daughter. It's a plea to the overlords, or to the daughter itself. Like a plea to my, a prayer for my daughter is that now you're born. This is a personal letter to you from me, but you cannot deny the background, right? So, in this particular poem, so if this poem and this poem had come in 2025, the first responsibility is to situate the poem, that this particular lines have been taken from which poetry, right? So this poetry was a prayer for my daughter, and it was written in 1919, and it is important that all the poetries that are in the syllabus, over 60 of them, you know the dates in which year it was written, right? It is good that you know. It actually brings weight to your answer. And once it is written, as I've told you in the beginning, first you have to contextualize in the first paragraph, very briefly, like in 20 to 30 words, very briefly, you have to contextualize. So you mention that this is about a post World War One turmoil, and this is a crying letter of father in hope for a daughter. Actually, Yeats also wrote another such poem, like Father's Hope for a Son, in 1928. But this is not his own son, but the son of his friend, I guess. Right? So you first contextualize this particular poem. Once that is done, then you come to the larger chunk. Here you can give two paragraphs. You talk about the ceremony, order, and tradition. So basically, what does a poem say? And may her bridegroom, that is her husband in the future, bring her to a house into that family where all's accustomed, where everybody is like ceremonious, disciplined, ordered, ceremonious. Accustomed would means that it follows a particular order, it follows a particular tradition, right? So here we can understand that Yeats is moving towards being conservative, and he was a conservative. He was a conservative, right? So this is where his conservative philosophy, his conservative ideas gets reflected. So he says, and may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all is accustomed, ceremonious, not to that house where there is arrogance and hatred, which is peddled uh, around, right? So this part is very important. This part is very important. So here, just do not summarize it or paraphrase it. Here you talk about what does these particular words mean. Ceremonious, what it means. Accustomed, what it means, right? Okay. So once this is done, so this will be your major chunk, this part, this section, where you are explaining the key ideas of those four lines, right? That will be your major chunk. So probably 70, 80 words shall be gone to this particular section. So once that is done, you come and then you introduce the criticism part, like criticism in the sense the literary critic or any other person who has commented on this particular poem, or you feel, or this is your personal opinion, you feel that this particular poem reflects another philosopher's idea. For example, in this particular line, Yeats is emphasizing on tradition, as I've told you. He's emphasizing on tradition. He's emphasizing on the conservativeness, which is very similar to Edmund Burke, where he again. So Edmund Burke, even though he was writing 100 years ago, but the idea of conservativeness, the idea of tradition is reflected in Yeats's poetry, which was said to by Edmund Burke around over 100 years ago, right? So here, but again, as I've said, this section will be mentioned in brief. This should not be exceeding more than 30 to 40 words, right? Do not avoid overloading this section with too many critics. One, maximum two. You can talk about Richard Ellman. Richard Ellman is considered as one of the authorities of Yeats. He has written extensively on Yeats, right? We can talk about Richard Ellman also, but I would suggest do not go overboard. It's better that we stick to only two critics over here, right? Because examiner wants to know what you understand from the poem. Okay. And it is also very important in this case that when you are evaluating your personal insight, it should not be very commonplace. It should not be like very in a simplistic manner you analyze it. No. So you have to have that technical understanding of how to analyze poetry, which we will do subsequently when we'll be discussing all the five poems this time, or rather four poems this time in subsequent videos. You will understand that how personal evaluation is also done. There is also a kind of method to it. It's not arbitrary. Okay. Uh, so writing, so these are the few things that you have to keep in mind. First is that be clear and direct with the language. It's literature, we understand. You shall not be embellishing your language. There is no point. You have the content. Make sure that you communicate what is required in those 150 words, right? Be brief. Be brief in the sense, do not over explain certain things, right? For example, in this particular case, were all accustomed ceremonious. So this is a very important. This is the line which UPC is asking you to interpret, right? And may her bridegroom bring her to a house. There is no point of interpreting that particular line because it is understood. And may her bridegroom bring her to the house. Her, who is her? Her is Yeats's daughter Anne. Bridegroom will be her future husband. So it is an appeal that the future husband shall bring Annie to a house where all's accustomed and ceremonious. So all's accustomed and ceremonious. So um, this is the line which UPSC is asking you to focus. So here you can give 30 to 40 words. There's no point of explaining this section. Okay. Again, this is also important. For arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled in the thoroughfares. Basically, Yeats is talking about whom? Yeats is talking about the revolutionaries over here, right? Revolution. So Yeats had a distinctive distaste for the revolutionaries, and we will find it in other poems also he talks about, right? So we will be very brief with words, will not explain too much. Be balanced in your view. So when you're giving your personal opinion, this is when you're giving your personal opinion, do not go overboard and be fixated in one particular view. Be balanced in your view. So when we'll be doing Larkin, now Larkin is not a very popular figure. Larkin's poem would have certain criticism, but don't go overboard. You have to see the positivity in also in Larkin. Okay. And so one formula you can follow is that intro 30 to 40 words. You would be needing 30 to 40 words here because you have to contextualize. You have to name that. You have to give the name of the poem. You have to give the context of it around when it was written. So it will take around 30 to 40 words. Analysis and critic like 70, 80 or could be 90 words, and the remaining is conclusion. Conclusion again should not be generic, should not be summarization of what you have written. Conclusion should be an extension of what you have written, right? And we will, when we discuss the remaining poem, you will understand like how and the way the conclusion should be written. Okay. Uh, okay. So recapping the session again, structure the answer with intro, the analysis, the meaning of those lines, not paraphrase the meaning of those lines. Take a particular word or a phrase and explain it, imagery, symbolism, explain it, then give critical understanding of those lines, but not don't go overboard, maximum one or two. I would suggest it's better that you limit yourself to two. And finally, conclusion, which is not an extension of your, which is not paraphrasing or summarization, but is an extension of your answer. Okay. So use context and criticism smartly. Don't go overboard. Context has to, like, this is something that you have to learn, right? This is something that you have to learn. Write with precision, brevity is rewarded, and always remember, quality is always better than quantity. Even if you write 130 words or 140 words and there is quality to your answer, you need not write 150, 160 words. So you are saving 20, 30 words, which you can use it in other places, right? But here again, the fact that you're giving quality content, right? You're giving quality content, it does carry an impression. Okay, so this is the end of the session, and we will have another session on the remaining of the poems. Thank you.